Per share ratios tell you how much of something each share of a company is worth. As you probably know, publicly traded companies are broken up into shares. A share represents a tiny fraction of ownership of that company. If you own a share, you are one of the company's owners. As an owner, you want to know how much things, such as earnings or dividends, your shares are worth. That's where per share ratios come in. In this video, you will learn about some of the most popular per share ratios, such as the earnings per share and the book value per share. Our first per share ratio is earnings per share, or EPS. Earnings per share tells you how much net income, or earnings, is represented by each share. Earnings per share is one of the most popular metrics for fundamental-based investors. To calculate earnings per share, we divide net income by the number of shares outstanding. Last year, Bill's Burgers had a net income of $10,000. Bill's Burgers has 10,000 shares outstanding. What is Bill's Burgers' earnings per share? Earnings per share equals $10,000 in net income divided by the 10,000 shares outstanding. 10,000 divided by 10,000 equals 1. Bill's Burgers has an earnings per share of $1. That means for every one share of Bill's Burgers you own, you get $1 in earnings in return. What was Nike's earnings per share in 2023? Here we have Nike's 10K for the 2023 financial year. To calculate the earnings per share, we need the net income, which is found on the income statement. In 2023, net income was $5,070. Remember, these numbers are in millions. We also need shares outstanding. This can also be found on the income statement. Here we see weighted average common shares outstanding. It's a weighted average because during the financial year, the number of shares on issue changes. So this is the average number of shares that was on issue throughout the year. We also have two numbers, basic and diluted. Basic tells you how many shares were actually on issue. Diluted tells you how many shares would be on issue if things such as options were converted into shares. I normally use the diluted number as it's more conservative for calculating per share ratios. The diluted shares outstanding was 1,569.8. 5,070 divided by 1,569.8 equals 3.23. Nike's earnings per share for 2023 was $3.23. For every share of Nike you own, you would be entitled to $3.23 in earnings. You can see Nike has calculated this for us because it's a very important number to investors. Our next per share ratio is revenue per share, or sales per share. It tells you how much revenue you get for each share. Revenue per share isn't as popular as earnings per share, but I think it's still highly valuable, especially for companies that aren't focusing on profitability. To calculate it, we divide revenue by shares outstanding. What was Nike's revenue per share in 2023? Nike had revenues of 51,217. We know shares outstanding was 1,569.8. 51,217 divided by 1,569.8 equals 32.63. In 2023, Nike had revenue per share of $32.63. For every share, you would get $32.63 in revenue in return. Our next per share ratio is free cash flow per share. As you might expect, it tells you how much free cash flow each share represents. To calculate it, we divide free cash flow by shares outstanding. We need to calculate free cash flow ourselves. We can get the numbers we need from the cash flow statement. Free cash flow equals cash from operations minus additions to property, plant and equipment. Cash from operations was 5,841. Additions to property, plant and equipment was 969. 5,841 minus 969 equals 4,872 in free cash flow. 4,872 in free cash flow divided by 1,569.8 shares outstanding gives us a free cash flow per share of $3.10. If you own a share of Nike, you would get $3.10 in free cash flow in return. Our next ratio is popular amongst income investors. It's dividend per share. Most of the time, you will be looking at buying the common shares of a company as opposed to the preferred shares. So we will calculate the dividend per share for common shareholders. To calculate it, we divide the dividends on common stock by the shares outstanding. Dividends on common stock isn't found on any of the three main financial statements. It's found on the statement of shareholder equity. Here we can see in 2023, Nike paid $2,059 in dividends on common stock. For dividends, you want to use basic shares outstanding to see how much of a dividend each share was actually paid out. Basic shares outstanding was 1,551.6. 2,059 divided by 1,551.6 equals 1.33. In 2023, Nike paid $1.33 in dividends to common shareholders. Dividends are nice because this is money you can actually get hold of. If you owned a share of Nike in 2023, they would have deposited $1.33 in cash into your bank account throughout the year. Well, Nike actually pays a quarterly dividend, so you would have received around 33 cents every 3 months for every share you owned. Our last per share ratio is popular among old school and deep value investors. It's the book value per share, usually just referred to as book value. It tells you how much shareholder equity each share represents. Shareholder equity is the money owed to the shareholders, so it's popular among investors. Book value per share equals total shareholder equity divided by shares outstanding. Total shareholder equity is found on the balance sheet. On 31st of May 2023, it was 14,004. Diluted shares outstanding was 1,569.8. 14,004 divided by 1,569.8 equals 8.92. As of 31 of May 2023, Nike's book value per share was $8.92. If you owned one share of Nike, you would be entitled to $8.92 in book value or shareholder equity. Per share ratios tell you how much of something each share is worth. They are useful because as shareholders they tell you what you are getting for each share. If a company is issuing more shares and not growing, your per share ratios will be decreasing. But if a company is buying back shares, your per share ratios will increase without the company needing to grow. In the next video, you'll learn about value ratios. Value ratios tell you how much of something you are getting compared to how much you are paying for it. Hit the subscribe button to be notified when that's out. For more videos on investing, follow Value Theory or go to valueinvestoracademy.com.